Good evening. A workshop meeting of the Board of Trustees of Socorro Independent School District will be held Monday, February 27th, 2023, and the time is 5:30 at the District Service Center. This is a workshop of the Board of Trustees. No action will be taken on any item posted on this agenda. If you will please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands. Okay. At this time, we'll go to item number 4, Board Workshop, District Forensic Audit Services, RFQ number E2342. Presenter, Vicky Bettis.
Good evening, President Mena, members of the board, Dr. Carmen. This evening, we have a workshop prepared for y'all. We have Mr. Kasner, Travis Kasner with Weaver and Tidwell, and he will go over the scope and any questions and whatever the process is gonna look like. It's gonna be simply a presentation, so please feel free to ask questions if anything comes up. Without further ado.
Yes.
And as part of this, process of preparing the scope of work. First, there's really two main considerations. One is the review period as far as the time period that the forensic audit will cover. We typically will look at between 3 to 5 years, but again, that is something that's up to you. We typically don't recommend going past 5 years for, there's record retention issues that we will typically run into. If we do find, certain things, there could be statute of limitations. And so, really 5 years would be the high end of the range. And then as far as, determining the scope and the areas of review, what we typically do is there's really 3 different pieces that we incorporate, and we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. But the first is, looking at areas that are with school districts generally susceptible to fraud, waste, and abuse. And I'll touch on those in a little bit more detail shortly. The second is areas where the board has specific concerns. And then third is what we will typically do, analytics on a broad spectrum of expenditures over the review period, and then covering vendor payments, check register, payroll register, to identify any anomalies that we will want to include for further review based on the analytics, and I'll touch on some of those in a little bit more detail shortly. So that first area that we talked about, the areas that are susceptible to fraud, waste, and abuse, from our experience, the ones that we've listed here are the ones that we typically are including in our scope of work. So payments to vendors, contractors, and consultants. As part of this process, we're looking to identify any affiliated vendors, whether it's with officials or employees, administrators. We're running different tests to identify any vendors or contractors where there's affiliation, and there's valid reasons for that. It's really more of just identifying those for further review. Looking at the purchasing and procurement process, that falls under that first bullet as well. Those are common areas that we're asked to look at. Credit card expenditures, expense reimbursements, bond funds, construction expenditures, federal funds. These are the areas that are most common in these types of forensic audits. But again, it's really our goal is to drill down on the areas that are the highest concern for the district and the board. So again, we'll that's a kind of a good segue into the next area, which is incorporating areas where the board has specific concerns. I know during the last presentation that we did, there was someone had mentioned records retention as being one area, and so this I guess would be whether it's tonight or through a different forum, providing that information if as a means to include into the scope for further review. And then the third one is data analytics and looking at the larger population of expenditures within the review period. And then usually we'll find certain anomalies that we may want to include, whether it's through the vendor master file, the check register, looking at the payroll register. We also will do, we've already actually done some of this with the PEMS data, but doing benchmarking to identify areas where the district is incurring higher costs relative to similar school districts. And this is just an example. We looked at the last 3 years of the district's publicly available PEMS data, and really our process is to drill down into cost categories by function code and object code, and then compare those cost categories to similar school districts and normalize it on a cost per student basis. And so we've done that, and this really gives you the 10 or 12 cost categories where the district is ranked in the top 15% or so relative to their peers. So for example, for function code 11 instruction, object code 6321 for instructional materials, you see the expenditures according to the PEMS data for the last 3 fiscal years totaling about 14.9 million. And so that ranks 6th highest on a per student basis out of 45 school districts, which was school districts in Texas with enrollment between 25 and 75,000 students. And that's, a broad range, but again, we normalized it down to a cost per student. So, looking at, this isn't a set list. This is just an example of the type of benchmarking analytics. But it can be, one area if we're asked to, incorporate benchmarking into the scoping to identify certain cost categories that we can easily do that. And so that is really kind of the the background on the approach. And then I'm going to stop here and see if there's any feedback or any thoughts from the board as far as how to approach the scoping, because it really is a I think a collaborative effort on this part of the process.
I have a question. Can you clarify 6494 reclassified transportation expenses and give us maybe an example of what that would be?
Sure. So my understanding is that 6494 would be expenditures that are originally classified, to transportation, but then maybe later reclassified, like for field trips might be an example, where they're reclassified, to more for instruction purposes versus the student transportation. Those kind of things I think would fall into this category. It's hard to know, if we're going off of publicly available data. So, if we looked at the check register, we could see what exactly these are and drill down. It's really, fiscal year 2019 and 2020, where we see, that about $1 million in 2019 and 178,000 in 2020.
Yes, go ahead, Jen.
6494 is specifically for student use of buses. So whether it's from one campus to another for the field trips, it does not include the price of field trips itself. It's just the bus use. So 6494 is a specific account that we use so that we can report that to TEA, and that helps determine what our per mile cost is.
Questions?
Yes, he was discussing about how to get board input on the scope. What have you done in the past?
In some cases, we have provided a questionnaire to the board. We've had other situations where we've had workshops like this, and the board has provided the comments of, for example, if they there's a wanting to look at certain processes and procedures for purchasing and procurement, and just having those discussions. But we're also, we can do more of a questionnaire process. There's a few different ways that we can do that.
And those are?
Just having the discussion right now, or we can provide a written questionnaire to elicit the feedback through, we can email it to each board member and have, questions about what areas to be included in a forensic audit, is part of the scope, and then aggregating those responses based on, the across the board to determine the ones that are, the highest priority collectively. That's one way that we've done it in the past.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Bartlett.
Is your intention still to meet with, I remember previously you had mentioned to meet with the board one-on-one, and you just said, or with board members one-on-one, and then the questionnaire, and then the workshop. Do you still plan to hold all those three types of communication with us?
Well, I think that if we were to do the questionnaire process, then that would be in lieu of having the one-on-one. We can do one-on-one, meetings with each board member, and that would, we probably would not need to do the questionnaire, as those would probably, cover the same purpose in that sense. But we're open to, doing either one of those, and really whatever, is the preference of the board is fine with us.
And you were gonna be the lead on this, were you? Was it another gentleman that was gonna be the lead on this, and I think you were, I guess, his right-hand man?
So Jared Jordan is the partner for the forensics and litigations group, and then I have led over 25 forensic audits. Half of those related to school districts in the last 3 years, and so I will be facilitating kind of the most of the discussion and in the meetings and points of contact. So yeah, Jared will be involved, probably on a limited basis, but for, I guess to answer your question, I will be leading the engagement on behalf of Weaver.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, I lean more toward the interview with the board members. The communications is two ways. If you do a questionnaire, it's only one way, and we may go off track, and you can direct us in a face-to-face and say, well, we don't go that, or we don't do that, and we can stay on track and keep the scope of this work defined and not go off track with it.
Yeah, I think that sounds better.
All right. Is there any other questions?
Well, what would be the timeline if we start doing that type of, if we start doing the interviews and moving forward? What timeline do you see?
I'm lying.
I think that we can, do those, if we do them virtually, I think that'll help to, we can do them in person if that's the preference. I think virtually probably will give us the the most efficiency. And it's really just a function of, everybody's schedule. I would probably allow 2 to 3 weeks to complete, all of the interviews and then prepare, the information, aggregating those responses to present back to the board. So, maybe 3 weeks for the interviews and then summarizing the information to present back to the board. And we would, we also would need to get an engagement letter, and contract in place before that. So, which I think can be done quickly, but that's, logistically something we would need to do first. But, I would say 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, if, just to be absolutely safe.
Sounds good. Okay, guys. So we're good then, right? Beautiful.
Was there any more information you had for us, or this was the end of the presentation?
Yeah, that's the end of the presentation, and we can work on putting together kind of our standard engagement letter and getting that ready. But yeah, that was really the extent of it, and trying to work with the board to kind of go through the process that works for everybody. And so I think that was really the goal.
I have a question for you, Mr. Travis. When is the next time that we're gonna see you or meet with you again?
I think we will schedule the one-on-one meeting. So it will be in the one-on-one setting, and then we will present back to the board as a whole once we've conducted each of those individual interviews.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. You have another question? Go ahead, Mr. Nakara.
Mr. Kasner, what's the typical timeline for the total duration of something like this, of an audit like this?
It's going to be directly correlated to the scope of work. If we're asked to look at, 2 years versus 5 years, if we're asked to look at, a broad range of expenditures versus certain areas, it's could range from, we've had some that have been 2 to 3 months and others that are 6 or 7 months, and it's directly related to the scope of work that we're asked to carry out by the board.
And then what's the typical result? What's the final work product look like? Is it, say a summary of findings, if any, recommendations? Is it, a book 1,000 pages long? What does that look like?
We can do it different ways. We've done written reports. We've done presentations to audit committee. We can, do it in an oral presentation. It really just depends. A lot of times we're asked to provide a written report. It doesn't have to be 1,000 pages. It's really just a function of, what we're asked to look at and what the request is. But, typically we do a written report and then an oral presentation that covers the observations, findings, and recommendations from the work completed.
And then typically, how big is your team? I know that you're the lead on this. I assume that's probably associated with the scope as well, but what's, typical?
Typically it would be 3 or 4, people on the team. So myself and 2 or 3 other individuals.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, if there's no more further questions, I will adjourn this meeting. Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Travis. Thank you for.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions? I will adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned. Time is 5:48. Thank you. Have a good evening.